Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hey there, welcome back. Today we're going to be continuing with our study of the fiction and philosophy of C.S. Lewis with an introduction to Till We Have Faces. And stay tuned for the very end as I provide you with a preview of what's coming up on the Mythic Mind podcast between now and the end of the year. But for now, let's introduce Till We Have Faces. Hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome back as we get ready for Till We Have Faces, which is one of my favorite novels, very well maybe my favorite from C.S. Lewis. In fact, it was C.S. Lewis's own favorite. He thought that it was the best that he had produced, and despite the fact that it wasn't very well received at the time that it was published. But it most certainly does demonstrate a maturity in his writing, a maturity in his thinking. It's a lot more sophisticated from a literary angle, as well as perhaps from a philosophical angle, than we get in his earlier works. Now, that says a lot because we've just finished up the Ransom series, and that has great depth in its own right. However, a lot of the Ransom series, as deep as it is, as profound as it is often kind of on the nose regarding the allegory, where this is pointing us to that. Whereas Till We Have Faces is more of a myth, right? It's more of an imaginative telling. It's something that isn't going to let us just walk away thinking, here's what Lewis is telling me. We'll get some of that, but really what Lewis is doing is he's aiming at our hearts first. He's aiming at our imaginations. He's trying to bring us into a mystery. And if you've read this book before, then you probably already know that the first time that you finished reading this book, at least this was my experience, and it seems to be the case for many people, the first time you finish reading this book, you don't fully get it. I mean, you might understand a good portion of what's going on, but there's a sense in which you're kind of on the edge of a mystery. You haven't quite been let into yet. And I don't think that you really start to get into that mystery in the most meaningful sense until you read it, at least, on your second go around, and maybe even more, as new things start to get unlocked for you. And so in that sense, a good myth is a kind of labyrinth. And you have to go through and you have to get lost a few times before you are able to find your way out. Now, a lot of readers never do find their way out. A lot of people have a very difficult time with this book because it's not quite as clear exactly what Lewis is telling us. And also just the writing style is very different, right? Because in all of his other novels, in the Ransom series that we just finished, or in Narnia, if you're already familiar with that, you know that Lewis's prose is just very beautiful. It's very descriptive. It's very laden with sense imagery. His prose itself has a very poetic nature to it. Whereas this book is very different, and part of that reason is that Lewis is not writing it. Rather, he is adopting the persona of Orual, one of the main characters of the story, who's said to be giving us this account. And Orual comes from the land of Glome, which is just beyond the Hellenistic territory, and so there's a lot of Greek influence here, even though they would probably be classed as barbarians by the Greeks. But Queen Orual would have used Greek for formal matters, and so the idea here is that she is providing us this story in Greek with a kind of formalized writing, and so a lot of abrupt statements, just not quite as flowy as Lewis tends to be. And I think that Lewis does a remarkable job of putting himself in the mind of this character as he gives us the narration. And side note, because Lewis himself is not the narrator of this book, you should recognize that the narrator is not entirely reliable, right? They have a perspective at play here that will become evident as we go through the story. And so all that to say, this is a very different kind of book from Lewis if you're used to Lewis's other works. But I believe that it is the best. I believe that it is demonstrates his most mature, most sophisticated literary prowess. And I should also add on that note that a lot of Till We Have Faces is owed to Lewis's wife, Joy. And in fact, so much so that Lewis had apparently wanted Joy to be listed on the title page, but she decided against it because she saw her primary contribution here to be helping Lewis to write more like himself. And just consider that perspective, in light of everything we talked about with the Ransom series, right? About Mars and Venus help each other be more of themselves. And so we see that even in the playing out of Till We Have Faces. Also, speaking of the Ransom series, note that the principal goddess in Gloam is Ungit, who we're told right at the beginning is actually their version of Aphrodite. Aphrodite, of course, who is the Greek manifestation of Venus. And so some of the ideas that we've been seeing in the Ransom series are very much going to be at play here, right? We've been to Paralandra. Paralandra played a very significant role in That Hideous Strength. And now we see that Venus has a very important role in the movement of this story. And so keep some of those themes in mind. We're by no means going to see repetition of Paralandra or That Hideous Strength, but we are going to see some rhyming themes here at play. And so just keep that in mind, that Ungit is Venus. But I don't want to say too much more about the story at this point, because especially if you are approaching this for the first time, I want for it to really be fresh for you while you're reading it. Now, I do have some secondary text for you that it should open up this story even more. First of all, we have C.S. Lewis's own The Four Loves, in which Lewis talks about the loves of affection, friendship, eros, and charity. And this is as much related to Till We Have Faces as the abolition of man is to That Hideous Strength. And so in other words, if you read one companion text to Till We Have Faces, it should probably be The Four Loves. Now, as far as non-Lewis texts that are directly related to Till We Have Faces, first we have Christine Norval's Till We Have Faces, a reading companion. And it really is just that. It's a reading companion. And so it goes chapter by chapter, just a few pages of analysis and reflection per chapter. It's a fairly easy read, and I don't mean by that it's not substantial, that's not deep, or doesn't provide some heavy analysis, but it's not terribly difficult to read, and she doesn't really get into a lot of the weeds there. She doesn't get off topic and get into broader philosophical issues very much. She does a good job of just sticking chapter by chapter analysis and connecting to that a little bit with some of Lewis's other writings, such as The Four Loves. And so this is something that I would recommend to you. Now, same kind of format, but a little bit heavier, is Doris Meyer's Bareface, a guide to C.S. Lewis's last novel. Now, Bareface, by the way, was actually Lewis's original title for the book, hence the name of this book. Now, this also goes chapter by chapter. It just goes to gets a little bit heavier, a little bit more connections to Lewis's other writings, a little bit more connections to Lewis's thought, as well as some references to some other texts that are helpful for better understanding Lewis kind of in context of his times, literature that he's reading at the time, that sort of thing. And so, for another good chapter by chapter analysis, you have Bareface by Doris Myers. Now, next we have Reason and Imagination in C.S. Lewis, a study of Till We Have Faces. This is by Peter Shakel, I believe. This also provides chapter-by-chapter analysis, but also a big focus of this text is on tracing the progression of Lewis's framework in relating reason and imagination. And so, in addition to providing this chapter-by-chapter analysis until we have faces, it also progresses through Lewis's works, kind of survey style, looking at different eras of his life, and looking how earlier in his life, not long after his conversion, he has a big focus on reason, on right thinking. And you see this in some of his apologetic works. Now, as you move further and further in his life, he starts to prioritize imagination. He starts to prioritize myth over more clear-cut, didactic presentations, which is why his final novel is the most quintessentially mythic of all of the stories that he has written. And I think that we're going to see that contrast play out pretty well as we go from Ransom, in which the philosophy, the lessons that Lewis is teaching us are very much on the head, right? Especially in coming out of That Hideous Strength. In all the conversations between Jane and Ransom, you have Ransom just basically giving you Lewis's philosophy. We're not going to get that until we have faces. Because, as we're going to see in the story, reason itself is grounded in something that we can't necessarily approach through reason. And that's tied up with Lewis's progression in emphasizing the imaginative and emphasizing the idea of myth. And so this is a very interesting read in both looking at Till We Have Faces in particular, as well as tracing this broader conversation that Lewis is having with himself, as well as with others and with other texts. And so that was Reason and Imagination in C.S. Lewis. Now, as far as which of these texts would be most useful to you, I mean, that just really depends on what it is that you're looking for. If you're looking for something relatively light but still really helpful in helping you to get a better understanding of what's going on in the text, you've got Christine Norval's, let me line this up right, Christine Norval's Till We Have Faces, a reading companion. If you want a similar format but a little bit heavier, then you've got Doris Meyer's Bareface. And then lastly, if you want to get a little bit more into the progression of his philosophy regarding reason and imagination, you have Reason and Imagination in C.S. Lewis. Now, if I had to rank these as far as my personal preference, I would probably go with the reverse order of what I just said. So I would go with Reason and Imagination, Bareface, and then the reading companion. You can't really go wrong with any of these. Now, what I'm going to do for you for the rest of this presentation is tell you about the traditional myth of Psyche and Cupid, which is the myth that Lewis is retelling in Till We Have Faces. Now, I kind of debated with myself whether or not I want to do this, because if you're not familiar with the myth, it's not a bad thing to just read Lewis first and let all of it just be totally fresh and new to you as you read, and not get preoccupied with what Lewis is doing with the myth, but instead, at least for your first go around, just read the story, and that's not a bad place to start. And then once you read the story, go back and learn about the original myth, and then do the more meta-analysis of figuring out what Lewis is doing with the changes that he makes. That's not a bad way to do it. And so if you never read the story and you want to go that approach, you don't want to jump right into the meta-analysis, but you just want to read the story, then maybe you should stop here and then come back and listen to the rest of this video once you have finished Till We Have Faces at least one time around. Now, but that's entirely up to you. If you want to just keep going right now, you can do that as well, and that might be helpful also. Now, I'm actually going to read the summary of this story as it's provided in Reason and Imagination. All right, let's go. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who had 3 daughters, 2 of them beautiful, but the third, the youngest, so beautiful that people worshipped her as a goddess and neglected the worship of Venus for her sake. Therefore, although her sisters were married to kings, Psyche, the youngest, had no suitors. Because of her beauty and supposed divinity, no man dared aspire to her hand. Her father consulted the oracle of Apollo about her marriage, and was told that she was not to marry a human. Rather, she was to be exposed on a mountain where a dire serpent would take her as his bride. With great sorrow and funeral rites, Psyche was abandoned on the mountain. Venus, jealous of Psyche's beauty and of the honor given to her, had a different fate in mind for her. She ordered her son Cupid to use his magic arrows to cause the girl to fall in love with the most deformed and ignoble man he could find. Cupid set off to do so, but, upon seeing Psyche, fell in love with her himself. When she was left on the mountain, therefore, he had the west wind carry her to his palace. Invisible servants welcomed her, bathed her, sang to her, and brought her a sumptuous banquet. That night Cupid came to her and made her his wife, but left before daybreak, having forbidden her to see his face. After some days, Psyche longed to see her sisters, and begged that they might visit her. The god consented reluctantly, warning her of possible consequences, and had the west wind waft them to the palace. Psyche entertained them with baths, music, and divine delicacies. When they inquired about her husband, Psyche said that he was a handsome young man who spent most of his time in the hills hunting. She loaded their arms with jewels and treasures as they left, and urged them to return. Although to Psyche they expressed delight at her good fortune, inwardly they were consumed with envy, for Psyche's palace, wealth, and spouse were superior to their own. They conspired to destroy her happiness, and found the means upon their next visit, for the simple Psyche, now pregnant and forewarned that her sisters intended her harm, forgot her earlier story and said that her husband was a middle-aged merchant with gray hair. Realizing that Psyche had not seen her husband, and suspecting that she was married to a god, the sisters returned the next day and persuaded Psyche that her mysterious husband must actually be a monstrous serpent, who devoured pregnant women. They instructed her to hide a lamp and a sharp knife in the room, and, when her husband was sleeping, to take out the lamp by its light to cut off his head. All this the gullible Psyche, terribly frightened by the words, promised to do. That night she brought out the lamp and saw not a monster, but Cupid, the sweetest and most beautiful of the gods. She gazed on him with insatiable love, until a drop of hot oil from her lamp fell on his shoulder and woke him. He, injured by the burning oil and wounded by her lack of faith, rebuked her and vanished from her sight. Psyche, wretched and desolate, first attempted to drown herself, but the river would not let her drown, and the god Pan warned her never to try again. Psyche wandered on and came to the city where one of her sisters lived. She told her sister that her husband was Cupid, and he had turned her out for her disobedience, and that he said he would marry the sister instead. At this, the sister hastened to the mountain and flung herself over the cliff from which she had been wafted down before, but the west wind did not aid her this time, and she was dashed to pieces on the rocks. After doing the same to her other sister, Psyche traveled about the country seeking her husband. She was refused shelter by the goddess Ceres and Juno because of Venus's anger toward her. In despair, Psyche finally decided to seek out Venus, hoping to be reconciled to her. Venus, however, beat her, had sorrow and sadness torment her, and set her on a series of seemingly impossible tasks. The first, of separating a great heap of wheat, barley, poppy seed, peas, lentils, and beans into separate piles, was carried out for her by a host of sympathetic ants. Next she had to get a handful of golden wool from some man-killing sheep. A reed by the river whispered to her that this could be achieved by plucking the wool off the briars amongst which the sheep had been grazing. Then she had to fetch a cupful of water from a fountain fed by the river Styx, at the top of a sheer and slippery rock face guarded by dragons who never slept. But an eagle came to her, took the cup from her, filled it with water, and returned it to her. Finally, Psyche was sent to the world of the dead and told to bring back to Venus a box containing beauty from Persephone, queen of the underworld. A mysterious voice told her how to enter the underworld, make her way through it, and return. It warned her in particular that 3 times she would be asked for help by people who would all seem to deserve her pity, but she must refuse them all. And when Persephone gave her the box, she must, above all things, not open it to look inside. Psyche obeyed all this and returned to the upper world with the box, but curiosity overcame her, and she looked into it. It contained only an infernal and death-like sleep, which overcame her at once. Cupid, his injury now healed, and searching for Psyche, found her, put the sleep back into the box, woke her, and sent her on to Venus. He then interceded with Jupiter, who agreed to permit him to marry Psyche and make her a goddess. Venus, no longer having reason to be jealous of Psyche, was reconciled to her, and thus Psyche was married to Cupid, and after in due time she was delivered of a child, whom we call Pleasure. This myth stuck with Lewis for many decades, going back even before his conversion to Christianity. In fact, as I will discuss a little bit next time, we see that the very mystery of this story is converted with C.S. Lewis, or at least as his conversion continues to transform his mind and reorient him toward that which is chiefly true and beautiful. And as you experience his myth retold, I hope that you too will come to find the mountain from which all beauty comes. Until next time, Godspeed. Alright, I hope that you enjoyed that, and if you did, then I welcome you to support me over at Patreon at patreon.com/mythicmind. Any level of support will help me to go further up and further in to the various things that Mythic Mind is doing, and also provide you with a number of perks. Any level of support provides you with all 3 podcasts delivered into one feed, full Discord access, open invitation to any of our shows, and just general entrance into this fellowship. And so again, that's patreon.com/mythicmind. As I record this, we currently have 81 patrons. And as a reminder, once we hit 100, I'll give a green light to a new show idea that's going to take a look at the news through the lens of some particular C.S. Lewis text. And so either essay, fiction, or longer nonfiction. And so again, we're only 19 patrons away from that, so you can play an important role in helping us to get there. Also, in just a couple of weeks from the time that this is being posted, we're beginning our next study, The Elder Scrolls and Philosophy. If you'd like to participate in that, then just become a Tier 3 patron. I'm keeping the bar low for this one, just to try out some different models. And so just become a Tier 3 patron, either annually or monthly, and you'll be able to participate in that course. It's going to include pre-recorded videos, Zoom meetings, Discord. It's going to be a good time. So again, patreon.com/mythicmind. And I would like to go ahead and thank all Tier 3 patrons and higher by name. So many thanks to Mark William, Paul Clinton, Jamie, Aaron, Christopher, Justin, Aaron, Chaz, Evie, Kyle, Tyler, Chase, David, Amanda, Justin, Roger, Jack, Ross, Don, Adam, Kit, and Andrew. I really appreciate all of you. Stay tuned for the very end here after my sign-off for a preview of what's happening on the 3 Mythic Mind podcasts leading up to the end of the year. I hope you enjoy. And until next time, Godspeed. Here's a preview of what's coming up for the rest of 2025 on the 3 podcasts of the Mythic Mind Fellowship. First, on the main Mythic Mind podcast, we'll be continuing with our study of the fiction and philosophy of C.S. Lewis with Till We Have Faces, The Great Divorce, The Chronicles of Narnia, and The Dark Tower, C.S. Lewis's first and incomplete sequel to Out of the Silent Planet. Next, on the Mythic Mind Games podcast, we'll be continuing with our series on Final Fantasy with Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, and Tactics before taking a break to cover Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, and the Fallout show on Amazon Prime. Next, on Mythic Mind Movies and Shows, we'll be continuing with our Star Wars series with The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, Rogue One, Solo, and yes, the Star Wars Holiday Special. Subscribe to all 3 podcasts or become a patron at any level at patreon.com/mythicmind to get all shows delivered into one feed, early and ad-free. I appreciate your company on each of these ventures as we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. Until next time, Godspeed.